With less than 50 days until the 2024 presidential election, today we will be taking a look at a new 2024 election map based on the newest poll in all 50 states. Before we get started, please make sure to subscribe to my channel for more election content and more election predictions, as well as real-time updates on major events related to the 2024 presidential election. Today, we will start by taking a look at who is favored to win the election between Trump and Harris. Taking a look at the 538 2024 presidential election simulations, we see that Kamala Harris wins 64 times out of 100 compared to Trump's 36 times out of 100. Taking a look at these numbers, we see that Kamala has been surging this last week. This is mostly due to a great debate performance against Donald Trump, where Trump made many sloppy remarks that Kamala capitalized on. This was also the first and only presidential debate, as Donald Trump dropped out of a second. With all of this in mind, let's take a look at who leads in the national polls. Taking a look at the national polls, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 3.3%. In just the last 3 days, her lead has went up by half a percentage point, showcasing her success in campaigning and rallying compared to Donald Trump. Her numbers have also been going up because of her great first debate performance against Donald Trump, which ultimately led to Trump dropping out of the second presidential debate. We will now be moving on to the 2024 election map and how each state will vote based on the newest poll conducted in the state. We will start by characterizing the solid states for each candidate. These are states that are expected to go to each candidate by over 15% in margin, according to the polls. For Kamala Harris, those states would be California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, the District of Columbia, as well as Hawaii. With the solid states, it brings Kamala Harris up to 180 electoral votes. For Donald Trump, his solid states would be Alaska, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, and Ohio. With all the solid states filled, Kamala Harris stands at 180 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 142 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the likely states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to win by 10 to 15 points in margin according to the polls. For Kamala Harris, she will likely win the states of Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Maine's congressional districts. She will also likely win the state of Minnesota, Tim Walz's home state, in which he's been serving as governor in since 2018. For Donald Trump, he will likely win the state of Iowa. In both 2016 and in 2020, Trump carried the state by a big margin, and he's looking good to do so again in the polls. With the likely states, Kamala Harris stands at 225 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 146 electoral votes. Now, we will be moving on to the lean states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to win by around 3 to 8% in margin. We will start by taking a look at the state of Michigan. Taking a look at the polls in Michigan, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 2.5%. This is a pretty good lead for her, and it is growing, especially in these last 3 days. In 2020, Biden won the state of Michigan, and out of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, he won Michigan by the biggest amount, taking the state by 1.6%. If Harris can win Michigan, chances are Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are to follow, as the Rust Belt tends to vote together. As of now, however, Michigan will be going to Kamala Harris by a lean margin according to the newest polls. The 2nd Congressional District of Nebraska will also be going to Kamala Harris by a lean margin, making her total 241 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 148 electoral votes. Moving on to some of the southern states, the states of Texas and Florida will go to Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election. In both 2016 and in 2020, Trump won the states of Texas and Florida. Texas, on one hand, shifted to the left compared to the previous Republican elections, but Florida actually shifted to the right. In 2016, Trump won the state of Florida by around 1%, but in 2020, Trump actually expanded his lead in Florida, winning the state by 3.4% against Biden. As of now, Trump leads in both of these states by pretty big margins, and he's looking good to carry both of these states into election. We will now be moving on to the final key battleground states that will decide the winner of the 2024 presidential election. We will start with the state of Nevada. Taking a look at the polls in Nevada, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 1.1%. Nevada is one of the states in which Kamala Harris has been surging in recently. Just 3 days ago, she was only up by 0.1%, and just from these last few days of campaigning, she has gained a full percentage point in Nevada, which is huge for her and her campaign. This state voted blue in both 2020 and in 2016, and Kamala Harris is on track to win it again. Moving on to the state of Wisconsin. Taking a look at the polls in Wisconsin, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 2.7%. This is a decent lead, but Wisconsin does not seem to have that recent surge we're seeing in other states towards Kamala Harris. Even without the surge, Kamala Harris still leads by a pretty decent margin, and the Rust Belt tends to vote together. So because of that, I will be giving Wisconsin to Kamala Harris by a very slight margin. The state of Maine will go to Donald Trump, bringing his total up to 219 electoral votes. The state of North Carolina will also go to Donald Trump by a very slight margin. The state of North Carolina is that state that's always close but always tends to vote Republican. Besides voting blue for Obama in 2008 and in 2012, North Carolina has pretty much voted Republican in every single election. Trump leads in the polls by a very slight margin, and I think he will end up pulling off the win in North Carolina by a very slight margin. With North Carolina counted, Kamala Harris stands at 257 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 235 electoral votes. Moving on to the state of Arizona. Taking a look at the polls in Arizona, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 0.2%. Arizona and Georgia are the two closest states in the 2024 presidential election, and realistically, you just don't know how they will vote until the actual election. However, many issues such as the abortion referendum, I believe, will give Harris the boost here, so I will be giving Arizona to Kamala Harris by a very slight margin. With Arizona, Kamala Harris stands at 268 electoral votes, just 2 away from winning the presidency, to Donald Trump's 235 electoral votes, as we move on to the final 2 states of the 2024 presidential election. Starting with the keystone state of Pennsylvania. Taking a look at the polls in Pennsylvania, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 1.9%. Pennsylvania is the most important state in the 2024 presidential election, as if a candidate were to lose it, they would have to make up with 2 other key battleground states due to Pennsylvania's 19 electoral vote count. The polls right now do give Harris a decent lead, but many other factors such as a great debate, clarification on policy, and great campaigning will lead to Harris winning Pennsylvania. Regardless of that, Pennsylvania is still one of the closest swing states in the 2024 election, and we really just have to wait until election day to see how it actually votes. However, as of now, I will be giving it to Harris by a very slight margin. And with Pennsylvania, it pushes Harris over the 270 electoral count barrier required to become the next president of the United States. Harris stands at 287 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 235 electoral votes as we move on to the final state in the election. Taking a look at the Peach State, the state of Georgia, the closest state in the 2024 presidential election. Taking a look at the polls in Georgia, we see that Kamala Harris leads by 0.4%. In 2020, Biden flipped the state of Georgia for the first time in many elections, winning the state by 0.2%. Georgia is one of the states that is rapidly shifting to the left, and Kamala Harris does hold a slight lead here. Recent safety events in Georgia regarding gun violence will give Democrats a slight boost here due to Republican gun control policies being very weak in the state. That, along with a nationwide Kamala Harris surge, I believe, will give the state of Georgia to Kamala Harris by the slightest of margins. And that is the 2024 presidential election map based on the newest poll in all 50 states. The final electoral count stands at Kamala Harris at 303 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 235 electoral votes. Please note that this is an election prediction and results could go either way in the actual 2024 presidential election. If you made it here, please subscribe to my channel for more election content and more election predictions, and it would really mean the world to me if you did. Thank you for watching.